of Unqork. Hope you are doing great. Cool. So let's start with the new video or the new topic, which is server-side validation. Okay, but before deep diving into server-side validation, let's talk about validation, right? How the validation works and what is that? So let's assume this is our basic form, right? We have a name field and age field, and I have made it mandatory. And this is the submit button which I have created on this form, and it is having the action type as save. So as you know, right, whenever I click on the save button, let me open this inspect and open the network tab. So you already know the default behavior of this action type save, right? So if I put some data here, maybe test, and maybe this is a number field, I will add 12 and I will click on submit. Okay. So here you can see our data is stored into this schema, right? In the header, we can see this is the endpoint triggered to save that data and is a post request, and this is a payload that we are passing to save that data. And in the preview we can see whatever the data that is stored, and this is a submission ID, right? Whatever we have for this submission, whatever we have stored. So when I'm clicking this button, okay, so Unqork, what it does is it is doing this operation, right? Saving into the default module schema. That is something which is taken care by Unqork. But what is happening, we can see here this thing, right? What is the exact API call which is triggered for this? So this is the API call or endpoint which is triggered with the click of this button, and also the payload we can see, right? So as this operation is on browser, right? So this is a browser we are doing that. So this type of validation or this type of operation is called as a browser kind of a operation or a client operation, right? So if I put here blank value, then I will get this age is required, and if I click on submit, I will get this error, right? So we are doing the validation, right, on this for this form, and it is not allowing to save that data, and it is throwing us an error, right? So every activity we are doing it on a browser or a client. So this is called as a client side validation. But let's think of such a way that we are doing this same operation of validating thing or like submitting the data on a click of a button, but not on this browser but on a server. Okay, so what is that? That is called as a server side validation. So here whatever I am getting, right, this error I got and this message I got this on a client side, but on a server side we will get this thing like error as well as this message on a server side, right? So that is called as server side validation, as simple as that. You might be thinking, what is the actual need of this, right? If this validation is already taken care on the client side, why we need to bother to make it on a server side, right? That might be the question everyone would be having. So to answer that, what happens, let's suppose I have put the age here, okay, and if I'm clicking on submit, so here as these operations are on browser side, right, or client side, whatever you can say, I can see all those endpoints, right? So this is the endpoint which is getting triggered, and this is the payload. So we are directly exposing things, right, on a browser. So any end user, if he knows a little bit about this developer tool, he can take our endpoint, okay, or a API endpoint that we are hitting, and he also have the payload. So he can play around with that, right? We are giving one more or one step closer to hack this application, right, or to pass the data to this application or to this endpoint, whatever we have exposed. So when we do on a server side, we are not directly exposing the actual endpoint which is used to save the data. We are doing this operation on a server, so this actual endpoint is not exposed, right? So that is one layer of security we are adding to it. Use of the server side validation is, so let's suppose on a click of a button, we are not using this API. This is a default API which is getting triggered for saving this operation. But let's suppose you are hitting some API, right, which you have kept here. Maybe let's assume like you have created this plugin component here, and on a click of a button, okay, let's assume this, I'm not going to build this, I'm just giving you a sample example. Okay, so let's suppose this is a plugin that you are hitting or triggering on a click of the submit button. So this API is only gonna be used when you are dealing with this button, right? So this API is just used once, or maybe it is linked to only one button, and that's it, right? But if you keep that server side validation on, or like if you are dealing with the server side validation pattern, then in that case, or this API, whatever you would be using, that would be used for multiple operations. Multiple operations as in like it won't be only used, or so it would be associated with this button, but it would be associated and can be called by a click of different buttons, right? Because we are not doing here, it is stored on a server, and that server can be accessed by different modules, right? So in that case, we are like reusing that same thing again instead of repeating those things. Begin with configuration, where we are going to build the server side validation pattern. So for that, I have kept this screenshot, which is like provided by Unqork in their documentation, which explains this server-side validation pattern, or API architecture validation pattern. So here, what is, or like how we need to build this is, we should be having an express module, right? So in our case, if we try to correlate, this is our express module, right? That we have kept or we have built, right? So let me close or delete this plugin. Cool. So now what we need to do is we need to build this API module, right? Where the actual operation of storing that data into the database would be happening. And after that, we need to build a validation module. And before performing the actual operation of storing the data into this database, okay, from this API, we are going to hit this validation module, okay, and this validation module will perform that validation whether all the required data is filled or not. And once that is done, it will pass those data to this API module, right? As this arrow says. And from this API module, we are going to pass that data to the Express module. So in this way, whatever the errors, right, we are getting directly on the Express module now, we will get those errors in the form of a response, but in this way, like right from Express module, we will trigger, then API module, and then to the validation module, and further to the again Express module. So this is a validation pattern that is something used in case of Unqork. So let's build this. Create this module first, which is the API module. Let me go to the application. Let me click on create new. I'm creating that. So as I'm creating the API, so for that I will write it as API, and maybe I will write here as API module. So from the name itself, or we can relate this thing with this diagram, like we are building the API module, right? Maybe I can remove this API for this example, so we'll get to know that thing, right? Let me make it unique, something I will write here to make it unique. Okay, maybe I will write based that codes. Cool, right? So I've just added these things to make this module path unique, because this path was already there which was having that same name, so I have just made it unique by adding this initials. Cool. So let me use this module type as API, and that's it. Okay, let it get created. Cool. So let's build the other piece, which is a validation module. So I will write here as validation module. To make this unique, I will write this initials. Cool. And here this would be also of a type API. Okay, so now we have built all these three modules, and let's connect these three things. So let's build the configuration inside this, and then we will connect all these three in this pattern. Okay, so let me do the configuration for API module. So here I will open this API module that we have just created. Okay, I will just remove all these things which is there from the template, and we'll make a clean module. So let me clear this. Cool, I think that would be enough. And here I will write the request, panel request, as name, as we are going to pass name, or we are going to expect a a name parameter from the client side. So that is why we are creating a variable here as name, so that it can be mapped to this, and then the other one was age. Cool. Now let's create the initializer, which would be something triggered on a new submission. Init on load, and this initializer is something going to trigger a plugin which is going to call that validation module, right? So let's just add that plugin for now, and then we will hop on to create the validation module. So I'm just creating the plugin here, which is plug validate. Okay, let's keep as it is for now, and let's go to the validation module to do those stuff. So let me clear this off. Cool. So here in the validation module, what we need to build, right? That's the question, right? Because in the API module, which is this, we know what we need to do, right? We need to have a plugin to store the data, and also we need to have a plugin to call this module. What this validation module would actually be having, right? So that is what the thing is. So yeah, so this is like a something documentation I was going through before creating this video. I will share this link, so maybe if you want to go through this in detail, you can go through this. Okay, coming back to our thing. So here what we need to do is, so as at the start of this session I told, whenever we are doing the server side validation, it is nothing different, right? The client side operation only we are doing on a server side. So what we are doing on the client side is we are having this fields and we are clicking on the button. That's it. This is the thing why we are doing manually on this client side. But if we need to replicate the same action on a server side, we need to do that thing. But here we are not going to do it manually, but automatically as soon as we call that module, we are going to do that. So how we need to do is, so just think of a plan, right? Where if I want to validate something, those things should be present on that module, right? So that is what I'm going to do. I want to validate this things, right? So let's bring this thing on this validation module. So one way is like I can create a separate column, or in this way I can create or recreate this thing, the entire UI on this validation module, which is not the best way, right? Or the best practice. It is going to take a lot of time and it is not something which is recommended. So the other way is to import that module. So in the panel config, I will write panel. Okay, let it load properly so I can edit. Okay, so here I will write panel import client module, right? So from the name itself, we can come to know like what is the actual thing we are doing with this. And in the interaction type, we will keep it as panel, and here we will write import existing module. And here I will write the name of that module. Yeah, so this will be auto populated from this drop down, and I will click on save. So now what we have done is we have imported this UI on this, right, on this validation module. Now we need to have an operation which is something which can simulate the button click, right, which is submit button. So we are not going to create a button here, or like we are not going to actually click the button, but what we are going to do is in Unqork we can pass a particular key which is validate as true to this module. So if validate true comes from the previous module or the module which is calling this, automatically the things that we do on a client side, right, that's get replicated. So this might be confusing for you, so let me show you how to do that. So here we had created this plug validate, right? So in the plug validate Let's select that module which we want to execute. This is the symbol or the same way that we usually do to execute any module. Yeah, but here we are not going to just execute this, but we are going to validate those things as well, right? So we are going to make the mapping here as validate, and here in the property ID we are going to pass the string as true, right? So with this thing, what would happen is this action, right, of clicking of this button and getting this errors if those things are blank would be happening, right? So basically this module errors out, right? It throws a error once I click on this button. So the same thing would happen if I pass this thing to this validate module. That is what we are doing, and here we need to pass the data as well, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to pass the data, so which is data.name. This is something the mapping I am doing, data.age. So we don't need to again use or create this name and age on this validation module again in the panel request, because those property IDs are already getting imported from this thing, right? So we don't need to again do that. Cool. So this is what we are doing here. We are just going to map those things. And this is mapped with name, this is mapped with age. That's it, right? And now let's trigger this plugin from this init. So in this I will write plug validate, I will write trigger go. That's it. All of this three activities, right? Creation of this, this and this are done. So now let's call this API module from this express module. So my express module is this. I will just use a plugin again the same way to call that API. So here I will write plug call API module, and here again the same thing, execute module. Let me take this API module ID and let me replace it there. Cool. So now we are going to pass those details, right? So name, data dot name, age, data dot age, right? This is what we have passed from this. Now let's trigger this plugin on a click of a button. Event plug call API module, right? Cool. So everything is done, right? Not everything, but at least we have connected this three modules together. So let's try it out. Let me preview data here, which is maybe test, and age I will keep it blank. And if I click on submit, just observe here the network. Okay, if I click on submit, this execute is getting called, but you see it got error out, right? It is something called 412 precondition failed. So what is that, right? We are passing this data, so don't get panic. This is what we were expecting. This should error out, right? Because what is happening, we are passing this payload, right? We are passing this payload test and age to the API model, right? So let's understand the flow. So here this data came, name and age, and from here this init got triggered, and that init further triggered this plug validate and passed this data to this plug validate. But when this plug validate, where is it, from the top? Okay, let me open this. Yeah, sorry, this was the module. Yeah, so when this validate module got executed, you know, right, what happened? This action got simulated, right? Not this action, but usually whatever happens in the client side, that got simulated, and we know we get the error in that case. So that same error we got, okay, that is what we are able to see here. Okay, so in the validation error we can see age is required. So we were getting that same message on a client side as well, right? When we were not having this config, only a client side validation we were doing, we were getting the same thing. So that same thing got there as well, and that thing got transferred to this API module, right? So basically what it says is this module got errored, right? Because this plugin is something calling that validation module, which is again getting errored out. So that error is something coming on this plug validate. So that is what we are able to see on this, right? Yeah, so this is what we are able to see here also. In the preview, we can see component is plug validate, which means this plugin validate module got errored out, and this is the error. And type is integration error, right? And this is something we are able to see on a client side also, right, as a response. But this is good, right? But now we need to give it a finishing touch, right? This is not how we are going to do, just keeping it on error and that's it. We are going to handle that error and properly pass that error messages back to the front end. So based on that response, we can display whatever we want to. So let's do that. Okay, so in the API module, let's handle that error, whatever we have seen. Cool. So how to do that is, let me grab a data workflow that I will put it here. Maybe I will write the name as DWF handle error, because this is what we are going to do with this data workflow. And here, let's put this input here. And for now, let's save it. Okay. So here in this plug validate, we are going to map that or handle that error with this one, right? We are going to put that data workflow here, which is DWF handle error. So this data workflow will get triggered once we are getting error on this plug validate module. So let's save this. So as we have put this data workflow to handle that error, so for that first we should know what is the actual response we are getting from plug validate, right? So on the front end we can see that preview, like we have this response, right? But we should also we should know that what is the actual response we are getting when this plug validate errors out, right? So to check that, let's server side execute this module. So I can directly write those variables here in this plug handle error, but you would be getting confused, right, from where those variables have came. So for that I'm just executing a server side. So for that I'm executing this on a server side, so you'll get to know what is those variables and from where those variables have came, right? So let's grab that payload, which is this one, right? Copy object, and here I'm going to paste that, and here if I click on execute, so in this you can see those steps, right? So here you should see, let's go from beginning. So once that plug init onload got executed, it triggered this plug validate and it is waiting for that, and next step is this plug validate would error out, right? So when this error out, what it has done is it has created this variable, right, which is integrator errors, and inside that we are having an object which is the actual plugin which is getting errored out. So here is that one. So we need to grab this now, integrator errors and plug validate, and from here we will grab this message object where actually those things are present, all those messages, right, error messages. So let's do that. So in that data workflow I'm going to put this integrator errors, right? So now you know like from where that integrator errors are coming and why I'm putting here as integrator errors. Cool. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so we have this. Now let's go to plug validate. So how to do that? Get, let's connect this get here, and what is that path? Plug validate. So in the path I will write plug validate dot messages, right, or message. So let's put this for now and see what we are getting. So let's server side execute this. Okay, so our data workflow got triggered, and here in this console we can see the value of console. So now in the console we have this validation errors, and which is again an array. Okay, so we know that this is the error, right? Validation error, and we have an array of object. Here we have object. Now let's do one thing. Let's take this array of object and store it into a variable. Okay, so in the output I'll take this output and map it to the response parameter, right? Which is already we have that, right, in that API. So this things, right, validation errors, all this entire thing I'm putting inside this variable. Okay, let me grab this also so we can get the actual error message dot validation error, and that I'm putting into this variable which is called as response parameter. So this is the one, right, which is already there or which came from the template. So let's do that. Let's see if that variable value is getting populated or not. So keep if I click on execute, and here you will see response parameter is there, and inside that we have an array, and we have the one object here which is this, right? So this is how we have handled that error with this uh, error triggered in that plug validate, and safely we have landed that error into this response parameter. Okay, now let's do one thing. Let's suppose if there is no error, right? We have filled all the links and there is no error. So in that case, what we are going to do is we are going to save that data. So let's do this thing. Let's create one more plugin which is plug store data, and here I will use that create module submission, and let's save all this data into this module schema. So I will replace that. I will like storing all this data into this API module only just for this demo, and here we will put it as data.name, and here I will put it as name data.age and age, right? So this plugin which is to store data, we are going to trigger if there is no error in the plug validate. So we are going to put it in post trigger, which is for a safe thing, right? All perfect, no errors, that then save this data using this plug store data. That's it. Now let's try this whole thing from the front end. If I click on submit, so here you see now there is no error. We have successfully handled that error, but in the preview we can still see that errors, right? Whatever it has came from that entire chain, right? Whatever we have built. In this response parameter, let's take this response into some variable, right? So how to do that is in this plugin we'll map that thing, right, in the output. So here what is the output we are getting? We are getting data dot result dot, sorry, not result, or was it result only? Let me check. Yeah, data dot result dot response parameters. Let me correct this response parameter, and here I will write or create one variable which is errors. Let me just cross check this is correct or not. Yeah, this is response parameter only, p is capital. Cool, so it is errors now, and let's create a hidden element where we are going to save all those errors. Right, so yeah, let me put it here, some test, keep it blank. So now if I click, now we got this execute running, and let me check that errors. Yeah, so we have this errors as a variable, and we have that entire array entire array entire array of errors, right? So now what we will do is, with the help of data workflow, we'll just take this message and display it. So how to do that is, again, like take this data workflow, dwf map error, or instead of map, let's make it process error, and here I will take it as errors, and here I will use this sorry, not array to call, but call to array, and here I will write that name, which is message, right? And this I'm going to show a error message, right? So how to do that is, let's select a column maybe, and here let's select the action as message. So, and with this thing, what we are going to do, we are going to grab that message thing, and that we are going to display on a column with action as message, right? So let's do that, which means like somewhere here on the column top or bottom, that error would be displayed. Okay, I think we haven't triggered that data workflow. Let me do that. So yeah, post trigger of this, I will call this data workflow. Okay, let me refresh. Let me put some name here, submit. So see, now you can see here is we are getting this message, right? Age is required, right? And this message is something visible here as well, because we are grabbing that entire thing, right? Where the ID is age, right? So automatically Unqork takes the ID or looks for ID which is having looks for the ID on a UI which is matching with this, and it shows the message here as well. But here, let's suppose I have created this thing just to show you that if we want to show a error message on a different thing, right, or on a pop-up or something like that, we can do it in such a way also. So here this array and double quotes, you can again process that. I'm not going to cover that, but yeah, this is what the main intention was, right, to grab those errors and show it on a front end. So yeah, I think with this entire or a complete video, you have got this so-called very hard topic, right? But it is very simple, right? As simple as that. It's just like creating those entire modules and connecting those. And I think now you don't need to worry about this server-side validation. What is that? You are clear with this. But again, if you are having any questions, or if you're not having any questions, then also you can comment on the video that maybe you understood this topic or something like that, anything, right? So yeah, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel and keep supporting. Thank you.